Hi, before moving on to the inter-American system, I would like to say a few words about regional human rights protection frameworks in general. We will spend the next 3 sessions looking at various ones, most notably the inter-American, European and African ones, but also in other places in the world, such as in Southeast Asia, but also on the Arab Peninsula. There have been discussions of creating not just human rights instruments, but also adjacent monitoring institutions. And I can imagine that this is surprising, at least for some of you, since when we talked about United Nations system, it became clear that already at the UN, we have various parts. We have the Human Rights Council, we have the various treaty bodies. And so the question could arise, why do we need all of those institutions which essentially perform the same functions? This is what I would like to very briefly address in this video. Now, the first reason, which may actually be the best one, is not mentioned as often as it should be. And that is that, very simply, the regional mechanisms to some extent predate the UN system. In fact, the American Declarations on the Rights and Duties of Man was passed in May 1948. So it's actually even older than the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The European Convention on Human Rights dates from November 1950. So after the UDHR, but well before the international covenants, which came about only in 1966. And the state parties that created and adopted these instruments had good reason to believe that a regional approach to human rights protection was more promising than a global one, at a time where it was already clear that there would be a Cold War between the two major world powers, which would make it virtually impossible to come to a global consensus on which rights should be prioritized, how they should be protected, and how political backlash and political resistance should be confronted. From there, human rights regionalism developed a sort of momentum. And then looking at the European system, looking at the American system, African states also adopted the Banjul Charter on Humans and People's Rights in 1981. Likewise, in 2004, we saw the adoption of the Arab Charter on Human Rights. The reason for the adoption of these instruments are various, but I would like to point out most notably here that on the one hand, of course, they display a regional commitment to human rights in an era, particularly starting from the 1970s, where human rights obviously became a global discourse and became a powerful narrative that state parties felt increasing pressure to live up to. On the other hand, there is a sort of pragmatism here too. States, by creating their own regional organization, start to have a stake in the creation of global human rights norms, because each and every of those treaty bodies in particular, or human rights committees or courts that come with an instrument, and we'll be talking about those in detail, applies and interprets specific rules and thereby makes a contribution to how human rights norms, specific provisions, specific rights and specific obligations are understood, globally speaking. The second reason for the existence of regional human rights instruments and bodies is, and that's kind of related to the previous argument, is that they give state parties the opportunity to implement their human rights obligation in a context that is more understanding also of the political, historical, and of course also cultural varieties that exist in a particular place. Now, Africa or Europe or Latin America, for that matter, are of course huge continents with a massive variety of cultures, countries, and so on. But it is still easier to accommodate specific cultural practices and specific policies in such frameworks than it is at a global level under the aegis of the United Nations. Look, for example, at the Arab Charter on Human Rights, which in its preamble has a reference both to God and also to Islamic Sharia. And while we might be skeptical about the political motives behind the inclusion of these elements in a human rights instrument, they are also very much an opportunity to integrate two things, which is on the one hand a human rights framework, and on the other hand, of course, the religious and cultural practices that are prevalent on the continent. Another example of a regional organization standing out in dealing with a regionally important issue, and we've talked about this, in the previous videos would be the inter-American system dealing with the rights of indigenous peoples and really coming to interpret important but also controversial aspects such as land rights to be within the purview of its instruments and the provisions in it. The final reason, and I don't want to spend too much time on it here because I will extensively address it in the next clips, is that there are various human rights bodies, institutions, organizations, and even courts attached to the regional instruments. And as I already mentioned when we talked about United Nations, these regional human rights bodies are often more powerful, more authoritative than the global UN institutions. Not just can they provide legally binding decisions, most notably here the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, but also the African Court of Human and People's Rights, but they often also have more visibility and legitimacy with the local populations when what comes out of the UN, out of, for example, the Human Rights Council, is more easily dismissed by states and their governments as either coming from faraway Geneva or as being politicized in any case. That doesn't mean that regional human rights bodies don't have their own problems, for example, when it comes to justifying their legitimacy, but they do provide an extra layer and a closer layer of protection when it comes to the protection of human rights. In conclusion, regional human rights instruments are very important, and the regional protection mechanisms that come with them are in many cases as authoritative, as powerful as the UN system, and sometimes even more, most notably because they can come up with legally binding judgments, decisions for state parties. This concludes this first general video on human rights protection in a regional context. I will now address the inter-American system more specifically.